Chapter 94: Stealing Fragrance Without Selling Books. Lin Wanner felt a tingle on her back and couldn't help but laugh, but still persisted and asked, "If it's my parents?" Fan Xian's hand, which was enjoying the wonderful touch of the woman in his arms, suddenly stopped and looked at her squarely. "What if it's really the eldest princess and Lord Chancellor?" Fortunately, when the two of them said these things, their bodies were still very fragrantly folded together, effectively diluting the seriousness and horror of the topic. After a long silence, Lin Wanner bravely looked into his eyes and hooked her hands around his neck. "If I marry you, I'll be the Fan family's daughter-in-law." The meaning of this sentence, Fan Xian heard and understood, although these days the boudoir night conversation sweet slightly hidden worries. Also know that his fiancée grew up in the palace from childhood, is the Empress Dowager single-handedly brought up, rarely with the eldest princess to live together, so the mother-daughter relationship is somewhat indifferent. But hearing this answer, Fan Xian was still moved beyond belief. This pair of young men and women has a similar life background and growing up, so very clear each other's heart of bitterness and some kind of slightly self-possessed pride, but also precisely so, will be in the celebration of the temple of the place at a glance will be fixed for life. The emperor's family had no feelings to speak of. But Fan Xian gave this young girl unprecedented emotional impact and tenderness, and Fan Xian himself also from the darkness of the boudoir to find rest in their own already somewhat tired heart and soul of the space. "When will you be able to go out for a walk?" Fan Xian hugged her. Lin Wanner carefully lay on his left shoulder so as not to touch his wounds. After hearing this she helplessly replied, "I have been in the palace since I was a child, and rarely have the opportunity to go out. It is only from 4 years ago that my uncle gave me the status of a county princess that I have had the opportunity to go out. It's just that lately my body has become weaker again." She looked at him with little intention. "Do you think it's too uncharacteristic to be so sneaky all the time?" Fan Xian was stunned, and lowered his voice and laughed. But I like this sneaking around the most. It's just that you still need to walk around and bask in the sun with this illness." Lin Wanner heard him admit to himself that he likes this sneaky feeling, and could not help but think that these nights he had been so ridiculous, letting this young man lie by his side. His cheeks could not help but roll, spit, and said, "Then tomorrow I'll go into the palace, and go beg my uncle." "Uncle?" Fan Xian heard her shouting affectionately, and couldn't help but laugh in a low voice. "Yes, our uncle is the biggest emperor in the world. You are my wife if he says so." It was at this time that Fan Xian remembered to talk about the matter of today's holy decree. Hearing the content of the holy decree, the man beside her had been appointed as the conciliator of the Taishan Temple. Lin Wanner knew that the marriage had finally been finalized, and while pleasantly surprised, she couldn't help but blush again. Fan Xian smiled as he watched the blush on her face, thinking that this girl was gentle and crafty, but she was so shy. In the end, he still always thought that the women in this world were the same as the women in his previous life. Where did he think that the fact that he came to climb the wall in the middle of the night every day would have been a very big deal for a hallowed county princess? "By the way, last time when we first met at the Temple of Celebration, who were you with?" "It was with His Majesty." Lin Wanner replied curiously. "Ah." Fan Xian thought that he actually rubbed shoulders with the 9-to-5, and could not help but feel some different feelings in his heart. Since that nobleman was His Majesty the Emperor, the expert who had sparred with him was naturally the head of the palace guards, and to think that he was able to only spit out a few mouthfuls of sour little blood after sparring with the head of the guards, he could not help but feel a little proud again. Lin Wanner watched the expression on his face change and became interested, staring into his eyes and asked, "What? Very surprised?" "I can only blame myself for being stupid and not thinking of going there." Fan Xian said with a bitter smile, "I always thought it was the Empress Dowager or the eldest princess. Alas, after coming to the human world for a walk, if I haven't even seen the emperor, it would be a bit too regrettable. Although I don't pay much attention to outside things, I also know that the Fan family is extremely favored by the Holy Spirit. If you want to see His Majesty, it's not difficult, not to mention." The girl lowered her head and said shyly, "After the big wedding, you always have to go into the palace to pay a visit to your uncle." Hearing the word big wedding, and then look at the girl's shy and touching look, Fan Xian's heart swings, holding Lin Wanner's left hand secretly slides down, along the waistline all the way down, and finally touched that piece of soft plump place. The heart swings and gradually become obscene, the palm of the hand rubbing again and again, only to feel that under the palm of the hands of a piece of slippery, soft, and elastic, very suitable. The reason why some days ago Lin Wanner forced to endure shame, let Fan Xian daily bedside companion night talk, is because found their own clear and elegant fiancé is really a gentleman, so many days. But also just a shallow taste of incense will be satisfied to leave, and never too much over the line of things, so Lin Wanner put down her heart, deep down and even inexplicably proud. Unexpectedly, today, this guy was injured, but the heart of the color. So when Lin Wanner felt her buttocks being rubbed by that hand, she didn't react for a moment, and foolishly looked at Fan Xian with her eyes open for a couple of fingers, watching the lust in Fan Xian's eyes getting thicker and thicker before she woke up with a soft cry, and with her face swollen red, she reached behind her back to forcefully pull away from each other's colorful claws. Fan Xian has long been fascinated by the god is not guarded, how to let go. A side will be her into the arms, the right hand is injured inconvenience, then. Feet, like a large koala bear general entanglement want to struggle with the girl, low to the sandalwood lips kiss the past. A touch, all wet warm. After a long time, the two talents slowly separated, Fan Xian only feel relaxed and happy, do not know how to say, and Lin Wanner eyes also gradually show the color of confusion, just tears haze, actually shy almost cried out. Fan Xian looked at Lin Wanner's expression, momentarily dumbfounded, did not know what to say, hurriedly smiled and explained, didn't control it. You bully. Lin Wanner sobbed, only she didn't dare to startle the guards outside in the garden and the old maids downstairs, so her voice was a bit small. Where did I? Fan Xian felt greatly wronged, thinking that he was already almost married, so what if he made out a little? Seemingly guessing what the teenage boy was thinking, Lin Wanner puffed out her cheeks and said, there are still a few months to go. Fan Xian looked at her with a bad smile and said, we've spent these many nights together, so why should we care about that? Lin Wanner, but most afraid of this statement, heard him say out, Shai cannot, clenched fists will be smashed to his body, just. Smashed to half thought of his body as a wound, had to be aggrieved to put back. Which expected her this turn around, but coincidentally touched a certain indecent place of indecent shape. Wanner again is gentle and self-possessed, also know what's going on, and then do not care about Fan Xian's injuries, fiercely pushed him away from the bed curtains. Go back early, there are still injuries on your body. Lin Wanner buried her face in the comforter, not daring to look at him. Fan Xian's gaze naturally slid down, looking at himself and saying accusingly, then I'll come back to see you tomorrow. Lin Wanner pulled the comforter down a little bit, revealing that pitiful face, and begged, don't you have business tomorrow? Ah yes, the day after tomorrow the bookstore opens. Fan Xian remembered, the manpower of the supervisory academy had not returned to the capital, there was always no movement to be found in this capital, since this was the case, he would go along and do what needed to be done. It was precisely the sharpening of the sword that counted as a little bit of his outstanding quality. He could not bear to bully this girl again, so he had to push open the window and prepare to leave. The moonlight penetrated in, shone on the bed, also shone on the girl who was still sleeping next to him. Fan Xian couldn't help but snicker. He didn't know that this girl sleeps so well every day. He didn't know that after a few days he would become much fatter. The day after the opening of the bookstore, Dongchuan Road, jumping heads and heads, even the surrounding Imperial College have appeared a rare wave of truancy, street building in the lights and colors, a square face all wrapped in good wood, black through the bright. Really very bookish decorations, but there is nothing to do, this day, too many people, but the smell of sweat instead of the smell of the book. Most of the people came to see Fan Xian. Everyone was very curious to see how the bastard son of the Fan family, who had been in the capital for more than a month, could be so prosperous, and even more curious to see how an aristocratic son of a nobleman, who was capable of writing and martial arts, could think of opening a bookstore, and how it would not be a good way to make money in the world, to sell books. Since the assassination incident, Fan Xian's view on life had changed a lot, so this bookstore did not hide behind the curtain, but came out openly, admitting that he and his brother were the proprietors of this bookstore. He also gave the bookstore a name, called Tanyu Bookstore, and asked the prince to go home and let the Prince of Jing wrote it, which made a horizontal plaque hung in the door. The people beside him were skeptical about the meaning of the name of the bookstore, and Fan Xian explained that it was Tanya to brighten the mind, which actually means not to be troubled, not to worry, and not to be lost in tranquility. And also throughout Zhuge's phrase, non-tantalizing is not to brighten the mind, and non-tranquility is not to be far-reaching, and shocked the crowd a little. The son initially heard this explanation, is also a tiger body a shock, thought the Fan family boy is to use this to the dynasty up and down the crowd confession of their own, do not want to intervene in anything, to show weakness in exchange for security. In fact, only Fan Roro knew his elder brother best, and knew that Tanyu means once adrift in Tenyuzu. Seeing more and more people around, Fan Xian's forehead began to drip with sweat, and muttered to Boss Yi next to him, "The advertisement that I said a while ago was a bit too good, so how come so many people have flocked to the shop just after it opened today?" Yi shopkeeper is no stranger to the word advertising, laughed. "I heard that the proprietor is holding the manuscript of Mr. Chao's book, after 68 times, only we are exclusive to print, just based on the reputation of this stone record, will be enough to attract so many people." He paused and laughed. "Of course, people mainly come to see you, to see what a teenage poet who can kill an 8th grade expert looks like." Fan Xian was stunned and grunted, "Our body is not 8 feet long, nor is it 8 feet wide, so what's there to see?"